Wyoming Territory, 1878. The wind swept across the plains like a restless spirit, carrying with it the promise of change. The town of Clearwater sat nestled between rolling grasslands and the jagged silhouette of distant mountains, a place where the civilized world met the untamed frontier. It was here that Violet Blackwell arrived on a late spring afternoon, her dark brown hair pulled into a loose bun, wisps escaping to frame her delicate face. At 22, she carried herself with a wary dignity, her blue calico dress dusted from travel but well-maintained, much like Violet herself. As the stagecoach rolled into town, she sat rigid, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The driver whistled sharp and clear to signal their arrival, and Violet flinched so violently that the elderly woman beside her reached out in concern. "Are you quite all right, dear?" the woman asked. Violet forced a smile, the kind she had practiced in mirrors since she was 16. "Just tired from the journey, ma'am, thank you for your concern." The truth was far more complicated. Violet believed one thing with absolute certainty: showing vulnerability was a death sentence in this world. She had traveled west to escape that very lesson, carrying it with her like a shield. Her plan was simple: establish herself as the new schoolteacher in Clearwater, maintain her distance from others, and build a life where she answered to no one. Love and connection were luxuries she couldn't afford, not when they inevitably led to control and pain. As she stepped down from the coach, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty Main Street. Men in worn cowboy hats nodded politely as they passed, and women offered curious glances at the newcomer. Violet clutched her small valise tighter, her knuckles whitening. All she wanted was anonymity and independence. All she needed was herself. "Miss Blackwell," a woman in a sensible brown dress approached. "I'm Mrs. Patterson, head of the school board. We're so pleased you've arrived safely." Violet's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you for meeting me. I'm eager to begin my duties." "The schoolhouse is prepared, though I'm afraid the teacherage needs some repairs before you can move in properly. We've arranged temporary lodging at the Willow Creek Ranch until then." Violet stiffened again. "I was under the impression the teacherage would be ready upon my arrival." Mrs. Patterson's expression turned apologetic. "The spring rains caused more damage than anticipated. But the Hollisters are good people. Xavier is one of our most respected ranchers, despite his youth." Before Violet could formulate a polite objection, a wagon pulled up beside them. The man who jumped down moved with the easy grace of someone who spent his days in the saddle. He couldn't have been more than 26, with sandy brown hair and clear green eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His face was clean-shaven save for the lightest shadow of stubble along his jaw, and though his clothes were practical, denim trousers, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a well-worn vest, they did little to hide his athletic build. "Miss Blackwell," he extended a hand. "Xavier Hollister, everyone calls me Zav. I'm here to take you out to the ranch." Violet hesitated before accepting his handshake, noting the calloused palm and firm but gentle grip. "Mr. Hollister, I appreciate your hospitality, though I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition at all," he said, releasing her hand and reaching for her valise. "My sister has been excited about having company. Gets lonely out there sometimes with just the two of us and the ranch hands." As they said their goodbyes to Mrs. Patterson, Zav helped Violet into the wagon with a respectful distance that she appreciated. They were barely out of town when a train whistle sounded in the distance. The shriek cut through the air like a knife, and Violet's entire body tensed. Her breath caught, her eyes widened, and she gripped the wooden seat beneath her until her fingernails dug into the grain. Zav noticed immediately but said nothing, instead casually commenting, "Railroad's been a blessing and a curse around here. Brings supplies faster but scares the livestock something fierce." Violet managed a nod, focused on steadying her breathing as they continued on. The wagon rolled past meadows dotted with wildflowers and cattle grazing in the distance. Gradually, her shoulders lowered from where they'd hunched around her ears. "Teaching's important work," Zav said after a while. "Folks around here value education, even if some of the children can only attend when ranch work allows." "I look forward to meeting my students," Violet replied, grateful for the neutral topic. "I believe every child deserves the opportunity to learn, regardless of their circumstances." Xav smiled, the expression transforming his face. My sister said almost the same thing when she was teaching last winter during the previous schoolmarm's illness. Rebecca has a way with children. They crested a gentle hill and the Willow Creek Ranch came into view, a sturdy two-story house with a wide porch, several outbuildings and corrals where horses grazed peacefully. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. It's lovely, Violet admitted, surprising herself with the sincerity in her voice. Home sweet home, Xav replied, pride evident in his tone. Built most of it myself after our parents passed. 5 years of work but worth every splinter. As they approached the house, a young woman emerged onto the porch, waving enthusiastically. Rebecca Hollister shared her brother's sandy hair and welcoming smile, though her eyes were a warm brown rather than green. You must be Miss Blackwell, she called as the wagon stopped. I've prepared the guest room and dinner's almost ready. You must be exhausted from your journey. Violet found herself smiling in return, despite her resolve to maintain distance. Please call me Violet, and thank you for opening your home to me. The next few days established a routine that Violet found unexpectedly comfortable. Rebecca was chatty but respectful of boundaries, and Xav was often gone from dawn until dusk, working with his men. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite, asking about her preparations for the school term and sharing stories about the community she would soon be serving. On her 4th evening at the ranch, Violet sat on the porch enjoying the cool air after dinner when Xav joined her, offering a cup of coffee. She accepted with a murmured thanks, and they sat in companionable silence watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Rebecca mentioned you're from Boston, Xav said finally. Must be quite a change coming to Wyoming. Violet sipped her coffee. I needed a change. Something in her tone must have signaled she didn't wish to elaborate, because Xav nodded and changed the subject. I need to ride into town tomorrow for supplies. You're welcome to join me if you'd like to see more of Clearwater before school starts. The invitation was casual, without pressure. Violet considered it and found herself nodding. I should familiarize myself with the town, thank you. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Violet dressed in a simple navy skirt and white blouse, pinning her hair up neatly before joining Xav for an early breakfast. Rebecca had already left to help a neighbor with new lambs, leaving them alone in the kitchen. You look nice, Xav said, then immediately looked embarrassed by his own comment. I mean, appropriate for town. Not that you don't always look, he cleared his throat. Coffee. Violet felt an unexpected warmth in her cheeks. Yes, please. The ride to town was pleasant, with Xav pointing out landmarks and sharing local history. As they approached Clearwater, a train whistled in the distance, the sound carrying clearly in the morning air. Violet's reaction was immediate. She tensed, her breath hitched, and her knuckles whitened where she gripped her skirt. Xav noticed but again said nothing directly. Instead, he began talking about his prized quarter horse, his voice calm and steady until the moment passed and Violet's breathing returned to normal. In town, Xav introduced her to shopkeepers and residents they encountered. Most were welcoming, though Violet noticed some curious glances exchanged behind their backs. At the general store, as Xav discussed his order with the proprietor, Violet overheard 2 women whispering. That's the new schoolteacher staying out at Hollister's place, one said. Seems mighty cozy for a respectable arrangement, the other replied, though I suppose with Rebecca there as chaperone. Still, you know how these Eastern girls can be, coming west looking for husbands with property. Violet stiffened, turning to face them directly. I assure you, ladies, I came west seeking employment, not matrimony, now if you'll excuse me. She walked away with her head high, though her heart pounded. This was precisely why she needed to maintain her independence. People would always assume, always judge, always try to control through their expectations and gossip. As they drove back to the ranch that afternoon, Xav seemed to sense her discomfort. Town can be overwhelming. Everyone knowing everyone's business. Is that why you live so far out? Violet asked. Xav considered this. Partly, I like the space, the freedom, but community matters too. It's about finding the right balance. He glanced at her. You don't strike me as someone who's afraid of hard work or solitude, Miss Blackwell, but even the most independent souls need others sometimes. Do they? She murmured, more to herself than to him. That evening, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it sheets of rain and brilliant flashes of lightning. After dinner, as Rebecca mended by the fire and Xav reviewed his ledgers, Violet stood by the window watching the storm. A particularly loud thunderclap shook the house, followed immediately by a sharp whistle of wind through a crack in the window frame. The sound sent Violet into a panic. She stumbled backward, knocking over a small table, her breathing rapid and shallow. Both Hollisters looked up in alarm, but it was Xav who moved to her side. "Violet," he said softly, deliberately using her first name, "you're safe, it's just the wind." She pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide, seeing something beyond the room. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," her voice broke. Rebecca quickly gathered her sewing. "I'll make some tea," she said, disappearing into the kitchen to give them privacy. Xav stayed a respectful distance away, his voice low and steady. "Sometimes after the war, certain sounds would take me back to places I didn't want to go. Still happens occasionally." His words penetrated her panic. Slowly, Violet's breathing steadied and her eyes focused on him. "You fought." He nodded. 2 years with the Union cavalry, came home in '65 to take care of Rebecca and the ranch. He didn't push for her to explain her own reaction, simply offering his experience as a bridge. "It wasn't war for me," Violet said finally, the words coming out before she could stop them. "It was," she shook her head, unable to continue. "Whatever it was," Xav said gently, "it doesn't define you now. Not unless you let it." The next morning, Violet avoided both Hollisters at breakfast, embarrassed by her display of weakness. She spent the day exploring the nearby creek, telling herself she was simply appreciating nature rather than hiding. As evening approached, she reluctantly returned to the house, only to find Xav waiting on the porch. "Thought you might want to see something," he said, nodding toward the barn. "No pressure." Curiosity overcoming her reserve, Violet followed him. Inside the barn, in a stall lined with fresh straw, lay a mare with a foal that couldn't have been more than a day old. "Born last night during the storm," Xav explained. "Her mother was killed by wolves when she was young. She was wild as anything when I found her, terrified of humans." He knelt beside the stall, his voice softening. "Took me months to earn her trust. Now she's the gentlest mare on the ranch." The metaphor wasn't lost on Violet. She knelt beside him, watching the foal nurse. "She's beautiful." "Life finds a way to go on," Xav said quietly. "Even after the worst happens." Their eyes met and something shifted between them, an understanding that went beyond words. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Violet felt a crack forming in the wall she'd built around herself. The following days brought a gradual thawing. Violet began helping Rebecca with household tasks, and in the evenings she would sometimes join Xav on the porch, their conversations growing longer and more personal. She learned about his parents, who had established the ranch before dying of influenza when he was 19. He shared stories of his time in the war, not the battles but the moments of humanity he'd witnessed. In turn, Violet revealed small pieces of herself, her love of literature, her childhood in Boston, her dream of making a difference through education. She carefully avoided any mention of the 3 years before coming west, and Xav never pressed. A week before school was to begin, Mrs. Patterson visited to inform Violet that the teacherage repairs were complete. Violet thanked her, ignoring the unexpected pang of disappointment she felt at the news. That evening, as she packed her belongings, Rebecca appeared in the doorway of the guest room. "You don't have to leave right away," she said. "The school doesn't start for another week." Violet folded a blouse carefully. "I should get settled in the teacherage, prepare my classroom." Rebecca hesitated. "Xav will miss you, we both will." Violet's hands stilled. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It hasn't been an imposition," Rebecca insisted. "It's been nice for both of us, but especially for Xav. He works so hard, never takes time for himself." She stepped into the room. "I haven't seen him laugh as much as he has this past week in years." Violet didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. "I left some books downstairs that I thought you might enjoy." Rebecca accepted the deflection with grace, but as she turned to leave, she added, "Just so you know, there's a town social the night before school starts. Tradition for welcoming the new teacher. I hope you'll come." The next morning, Xav insisted on driving Violet to the teacherage himself. The small cottage behind the schoolhouse was simple but clean, with fresh curtains at the windows and wildflowers in a jar on the table, Rebecca's touch, no doubt. As Xav carried in her trunk, Violet stood in the center of what would be her home, feeling strangely hollow despite having achieved exactly what she'd wanted, independence. "It's a good place," Xav said, setting down the last of her belongings. "Close enough to town but still peaceful," he hesitated, hat in hand. "I hope you'll still ride out to the ranch sometimes. Rebecca would love the company." Just Rebecca, the words slipped out before Violet could stop them. Zav's eyes met hers, honest and direct. No, not just Rebecca. The tension between them was palpable, charged with unspoken feelings. Violet took a step back, suddenly afraid of the warmth blooming in her chest. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Hollister," she said formally. "Your hospitality has been appreciated." His expression flickered with hurt before settling into polite distance. "Of course, Miss Blackwell, good luck with the school term." He placed his hat back on his head and turned to leave. Violet watched him go from the window, telling herself this was for the best. Attachments were dangerous. Vulnerability led to pain. She had come west to be independent, not to lose her heart to a cowboy with kind eyes and gentle hands. The days before school began passed in a blur of preparation. Violet arranged her classroom, reviewed her lesson plans, and met with parents who brought their children to be introduced to the new teacher. She was professional and warm with her students but maintained a careful distance with the adults. The night of the social arrived and Violet debated not attending. But refusing would only draw more attention and gossip, so she donned her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and walked to the town hall. The building was decorated with lanterns and bunting, a small band playing in the corner. Clearwater's residents had turned out in their finest, the women in colorful dresses, the men in clean shirts and polished boots. Violet accepted congratulations and well wishes, playing her role as the new schoolteacher perfectly while keeping everyone at arm's length. She was engaged in conversation with the mayor's wife when the room seemed to quiet momentarily. Glancing toward the door, Violet saw Xav and Rebecca entering. Rebecca looked pretty in a yellow dress, but it was Xav who captured Violet's attention. He had traded his work clothes for a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment everything else faded away. Then Xav nodded politely and turned to greet the sheriff, leaving Violet with an inexplicable sense of loss. As the evening progressed, Violet circulated through the crowd, always aware of where Xav was in the room. When the band began playing a waltz, couples moved to the center of the floor. Violet retreated to the punch table, only to find Xav already there. "Miss Blackwell," he said formally, "you look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Hollister." She accepted a cup of punch from him, their fingers brushing briefly. "How are you finding the teacherage?" "Quite suitable, thank you." The stilted conversation continued for another minute before Rebecca appeared at her brother's side. "Violet, I've been looking everywhere for you. Do you dance?" Before Violet could respond, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A man stumbled in, clearly intoxicated, his clothes dusty from travel. "Where is she?" he demanded, scanning the crowd. "Where's Violet Blackwell?" Violet froze, the punch cup slipping from her fingers to shatter on the floor. The man's gaze fixed on her, his face twisting into a triumphant sneer. "There you are, wife," he slurred. "Thought you could run away from me." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Violet, whose face had drained of color. Xav stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her. "I think you've made a mistake, mister," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. "Miss Blackwell isn't married." The man laughed harshly. "Tell that to the marriage certificate in St. Louis." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "Violet Blackwell, formerly Violet Barton, my lawful wedded wife who stole my money and disappeared 3 months ago." Violet's voice when she finally found it was barely audible. "Thomas, please leave." "Mrs. Patterson pushed through the crowd, her expression horrified. "Miss Blackwell, is this true? Are you a married woman?" Before Violet could answer, Thomas Barton stumbled forward. "She's my property, and I've come to take her home." Nobody is anybody's property, Xav said firmly, and you're disrupting a community gathering. I suggest you head over to the hotel, sober up, and we can sort this out in the morning. Thomas ignored him, focusing on Violet. You always did prefer to hide behind other men. First your father, now this cowboy. He took another step forward. Tell them, Violet, tell them how you promised to obey, then ran the first chance you got. That's enough, the sheriff intervened. Mr. Barton, you'll come with me now. As the sheriff escorted Thomas out, the whispers began. Violet stood frozen, feeling the judgment in every stare, the weight of her past crushing down on her once more. Rebecca touched her arm gently. Violet. But Violet couldn't bear their pity or their questions. She turned and fled into the night, tears blinding her as she ran toward the teacherage. Behind her, she heard Xav call her name, but she didn't stop. Inside the cottage, she leaned against the door, struggling to breathe through her panic. A knock came moments later. Violet, please, Xav's voice was gentle. Let me help. Go away, she managed. Please just go away. Not until I know you're all right. A bitter laugh escaped her. I'm not all right, I'll never be all right. She slid down the door to sit on the floor, hugging her knees. Everything I built here is gone. They'll never let me teach now. You don't know that, Xav said. Let me in, Violet, please. Something in his voice, the genuine concern, the lack of judgment, broke through her defenses. Slowly, she stood and opened the door. Xav entered cautiously as he might approach a spooked horse. His eyes took in her tear-stained face and he seemed to physically restrain himself from reaching for her. What happened? He asked simply. Violet turned away, moving to the small window that overlooked the schoolyard. I married Thomas Barton when I was 18. My father arranged it. Thomas was his business partner, 20 years my senior but wealthy and respected. Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. At first he was kind, or what passed for kindness. Then he began to control everything, what I wore, who I spoke to, when I could leave the house. She wrapped her arms around herself, continuing without looking at Xav. The first time he hit me was 6 months after the wedding. I had spoken to a male neighbor without permission. He apologized afterward, said it would never happen again. She laughed bitterly. It became a pattern. The beatings, then the apologies, then the gifts, then the beatings again. Xav made a sound of distress but didn't interrupt. Whenever I displeased him, he would whistle, a specific pattern, 3 short notes. It meant punishment was coming. Violet shuddered. 3 years I lived like that. Then one day, while he was away on business, I took what money I could find and ran. I changed my name back to my maiden name and kept moving until I saw the advertisement for a schoolteacher in Wyoming Territory. She finally turned to face him. So now you know, I'm a liar, a thief, and a woman who broke her marriage vows. The town will never accept me now. Xav's expression was a complex mixture of anger and compassion. You're none of those things, you're a survivor, Violet. You did what you had to do to stay alive. It doesn't matter what you think, she said, exhaustion settling into her bones. The school board won't allow a married woman to teach, especially not one who abandoned her husband. You're wrong, Xav said with quiet conviction. This town values justice as much as propriety, when they hear the full story. I don't want them to hear the full story, Violet cried. I don't want their pity or their judgment. I just wanted to start over, to be independent, to never rely on anyone again. Xav took a step toward her. Is that really what you want, to be alone forever, to never trust, never connect, never love? The question struck at the heart of her fear. Wanting those things nearly destroyed me. Thomas nearly destroyed you, Xav corrected gently, not love itself. She shook her head, unable to separate the concepts in her mind. It doesn't matter now. By morning, the whole town will know. Thomas will insist on his rights as my husband. The school board will revoke my position. I won't let that happen, Xav said, his jaw set with determination. You can't stop it, Violet replied, suddenly bone-tired. Please, Xav. I need to be alone now. He hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her. Promise me you won't do anything rash. Promise me you'll wait until morning before making any decisions. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. I'll come back tomorrow, he said. Whatever happens, you're not alone in this, Violet. After he left, Violet sat in her rocking chair until dawn, watching the night sky slowly lighten. She had no more tears, only a hollow resignation. By mid-morning, she had packed her few belongings, ready to leave before she could be asked to go. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. She opened it to find Mrs. Patterson, Rebecca, and several members of the school board standing there. "May we come in, Miss Blackwell?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her expression unreadable. Violet stepped back, bracing herself for their condemnation. Once they were all seated in her small living room, Mrs. Patterson spoke. "We've had quite a morning of it," she began. "Sheriff Miller kept Mr. Barton in the jail overnight to sober up. This morning, Xavier Hollister arrived with some rather disturbing allegations about your situation." Violet's cheeks burned with humiliation. "I understand if the board wishes to terminate my contract." Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow. "Do you now? Well, before we discuss that, you should know that the sheriff sent a telegram to St. Louis this morning. The response confirmed Mr. Hollister's suspicions about your husband's character. It seems Thomas Barton is wanted for questioning regarding the suspicious death of his first wife, as well as numerous complaints of violence and fraud." Violet's head snapped up in shock. "I didn't know." "Furthermore, Mrs. Patterson continued, "Mr. Barton has agreed to leave town immediately, in exchange for the sheriff not arresting him on outstanding warrants. He has also, under some persuasion from Mr. Hollister, signed this." She handed Violet a document. Violet's hands trembled as she read the paper, a statement renouncing all claims to her as his wife and agreeing to a divorce on grounds of cruelty. "How did you—" She couldn't finish the question. Rebecca smiled gently. "Xav can be very persuasive when he sets his mind to something." "The school board has met in emergency session this morning," Mrs. Patterson said. "We have decided that, under the circumstances, your personal situation does not reflect on your ability to teach our children. The position remains yours if you still want it." Tears welled in Violet's eyes. "I don't understand." "Last night everyone heard." "What everyone heard was a drunk man making accusations," one of the board members said firmly. "What matters to us is the welfare of our children and this community. Xavier Hollister vouched for your character, and his word carries significant weight in Clearwater." After they left, promising to support her through any gossip that might arise, Violet sat stunned, the divorce paper in her hand. Rebecca stayed behind, perching on the edge of a chair. "Xav wanted to come himself," she explained, "but he thought it might cause more talk if he was seen visiting you alone. He asked me to tell you he'll be at the creek crossing at sunset if you want to speak with him." As the day progressed, Violet moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind struggling to process everything that had happened. By late afternoon, she had made her decision. She changed into a simple dress, let her hair down from its tight bun, and walked the path toward Willow Creek. Xav was waiting, as promised, seated on a fallen log by the water. He stood when he saw her approach, uncertainty in his stance. "Rebecca told me what you did," Violet said without preamble. "Why?" "You know why," he answered simply. She shook her head. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He took a careful step toward her. "I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you realize. I know you love teaching and that you flinch at whistles because a monster conditioned you to expect pain afterward." Another step closer. "I know you build walls to protect yourself, but behind those walls is a woman with an enormous capacity for love. I've seen how you are with the children, with Rebecca, even with that orphaned foal." He was standing directly before her now, close enough to touch but not reaching for her. "And I know that I've been falling in love with you since the day you arrived, even when I told myself it was too soon, even when you pushed me away." Violet felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I'm broken, Xav. I don't know if I can ever be whole again." "You're not broken," he said fiercely. "Wounded, yes, healing, yes, but not broken." His hand hovered near her face, waiting for permission. "And you don't have to be whole to be loved. We can be imperfect together." Slowly, deliberately, Violet raised her hand to meet his, bringing it to her cheek. The simple touch felt like coming home. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I know," he replied. "So am I. Love is always a risk, but some risks are worth taking." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting golden light across the creek, Violet made her choice. She stepped into Zav's arms, feeling for the first time in years the safety of an embrace freely chosen. Their courtship progressed slowly, deliberately, with boundaries Violet set and Zav respected absolutely. She began the school term with her head high, facing down gossip with quiet dignity until it gradually faded into acceptance. In the evenings and on weekends, she spent time at the ranch, rediscovering joy in simple pleasures, riding across the open plains, reading aloud on the porch swing, learning to trust again. The first time Zav kissed her, 3 months after that sunset by the creek, Violet initiated it herself, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. He held her as if she were precious, following her lead, giving her control she'd never had before. When winter came, bringing with it the Thanksgiving holiday, Zav asked her to marry him under a sky filled with stars, promising to spend his life ensuring she never felt trapped or afraid again. "I can't promise we'll never argue or disagree," he said, holding her hands in his. "But I can promise that your voice will always matter, your choices will always be respected, and your freedom will always be sacred to me." Violet said yes without hesitation, her heart finally opened to the possibility that love could heal rather than harm. They married the following spring, with Rebecca as maid of honor and the entire town in attendance. The school board granted Violet special permission to continue teaching as a married woman, a progressive decision they proudly announced was the first of its kind in the territory. On a warm evening 1 year after their wedding, as they sat on the porch of the home they now shared on the ranch, a train whistled in the distance. Violet tensed slightly, then consciously relaxed, leaning into Zav's embrace. "Better?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Better," she confirmed, "not perfect but better." He smiled against her hair. "That's all any of us can ask for." As twilight settled over Willow Creek Ranch, Violet Hollister reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from terror to tentative trust, from isolation to belonging. The frontier had not been the escape she'd imagined, but rather the place where she'd found the courage to stop running and start healing. Every whistle still reminded her of the past, but now it also reminded her of the moment Zav had recognized her fear and sought its reason, the moment someone had finally seen her pain and chosen to help her carry it rather than add to it. In that recognition had been the first seeds of love, growing slowly but steadily into the life they now shared. She turned her face up to her husband's, marveling at how far they had come. "I love you," she said simply. His eyes, warm and steady as the day they'd met, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "I love you too, always will." And in that promise, Violet found the home she had always sought, not in a place, but in a love strong enough to heal the deepest wounds and brave enough to face whatever the frontier might bring.